Hello, and welcome to an episode of Personality in which I'm going to be discussing with my guests a report that the Illinois Supreme Court Commission on Professionalism recently released on bullying in the legal profession. Just a content notice before we get into the meat of the episode. My guests and I will be discussing general and specific examples of bullying that can be difficult to hear or watch, especially if you have experienced bullying in your life. So just be aware of that. Also, be aware at one point in this episode, I do break down crying while relating an example from my career. And I know that can be difficult for people to watch and listen to. So if any or all of that sounds like something you just don't want to deal with, you may want to skip this episode. But if you are interested in the content, you may wish to read the report, which I will link in the show notes for this episode. So with those disclaimers, thank you for joining me for this important episode. Hello, and welcome to Personality. I'm your host, Lauri Rollings, and today we're going to be talking about a subject that's very important and very personal to me, which is bullying in the legal profession. My guests today are two incredible female lawyers and consultants. Stephanie Scharf, J.D., Ph.D., is a partner at Scharf Banks Marmor LLC, and Roberta Bobby Liebenberg, J.D., is a partner at Kaplan and Black, R.P.C. Ms. Scharf and Ms. Liebenberg are also principals of the Red B Group, which is a consulting firm that advises corporations, law firms, and not-for-profits about growth and innovation. They use database strategies to advise about policy changes, board effectiveness, talent development, and leadership. And they are also the co-authors of a recent report issued by the Illinois Supreme Court Commission on Professionalism called Bullying in the Legal Profession, a study of Illinois lawyers' experiences and recommendations for change. Welcome, Bobby and Stephanie.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much for being here and for your work on this subject. So, Stephanie, can you tell us a little bit about the impetus for this report?
I'd be happy to. I think it's fair to say that all credit for this report and for implementing the research goes to the Illinois Supreme Court and the court's Commission on Professionalism, especially its executive director, Erica Harrell. Erica is herself a lawyer and saw how many lawyers over the years were subject to all sorts of bullying in their everyday practice. She has herself stories about how she was bullied, as I'm sure many women lawyers do, and a number of men. So it's really important for a study of this type to take place. Bobby and I think it's the first statewide study ever done in the country on this systematic basis. And we are hoping, and we're very glad that it had the impetus and the backing of powerful forces in the legal profession in Illinois. And we are also grateful that an array of courts and bar associations were very supportive of this research. And we had the honor of implementing it and reporting about it, but it's all in the context of really the Illinois Supreme Court's strong views that this had to be done.
Yes. I mean, I was amazed when I saw that a report of this nature was even commissioned. It was validating to see that someone in a position of power cared enough to even commission the report and then release it. So it's first of its kind and groundbreaking and very important.
So and I would just add, Lauri, that I think what's really important about the report and the work that Stephanie and I do as part of the Red B is to provide the empirical validation for people's experiences, that this is not an isolated incident. This is not something that is a thing of the past, and that we really wanted the data to show the prevalence and the impact of it because we wanted to provide data-based solutions to this issue.
The report intentionally focuses on the term bullying rather than harassment. Can you explain why?
Yeah, thank you, Lauri. And it's a really important part of our study because bullying is more than incivility, being rude or disrespectful. And it typically involves a power imbalance. And we defined it in our study as inappropriate behavior that intended to intimidate, humiliate, or control the actions of another person. And bullying may take many forms, both verbal, nonverbal, or physical acts, like actually throwing something at someone. And why we chose bullying was that workplace anti-harassment policies and laws apply only to abusive conduct that's targeted at someone due to a protected characteristic, such as gender, race, ethnicity, age, disability. And so there are, legal definitions of harassment and bullying that can't be proven by such a characteristic. And of course, there is some bullying that sort of crosses the line to both, may not be illegal under anti-harassment laws and also may not be encompassed by an organization's anti-harassment policies. And because there may not be formal legal mechanisms to address bullying conduct, we thought it was really important to use the definition that we use to collect the data to again assess this conduct and to ensure that we had ways to define it, measure it, and then suggest ways to ameliorate it. And bullying, I think a lot of times people think, this is a rite of passage. We were bullied in school and you sort of, have to just take it. It just becomes, especially in the legal profession, sort of a rite of passage. And I think the also important part of why we chose bullying is that it really has a pernicious effect on lawyers, their careers, the quality of their work, their productivity, their physical well-being, their mental well-being. And because bullying can lead to stress, anxiety, and create a toxic workplace culture, again, we thought it was important to focus on bullying and collect the empirical data that would, as I said, show how widespread it is, and to address it.
I think that is a brilliant distinction between bullying and harassment, because I can speak firsthand to the importance of that distinction and the lack of legal redress, either under the law or under internal organizational policies for bullying versus harassment, because I have tried more than once to address bullying and have been told there's nothing you can do about it. Our policy doesn't prohibit it. It's legal for this person to behave in this way. And I've left more than one workplace because of it, because of the toll it was taking on my mental health, my physical health, and certainly my productivity and the quality of my work. So I just want to amplify that point for you, that this is real. It's something that really robs the legal profession of talented, committed people, and it's tragic. So, Stephanie, could you tell us a little bit about the report's methodology?
Sure. So we actually went to a fair amount of effort to make sure the results we had were reliable and valid and meaningful for the profession. And so actually, I think our methodology began with really a literature review about bullying. And there wasn't a lot of literature about bullying in the law, but there was certainly a lot of literature about bullying at work generally. And we came up with a definition that we used for the research we did, which is that bullying is inappropriate behavior intended to intimidate, humiliate, or control the actions of another person. Bullying may take many forms, including verbal, nonverbal, or even physical acts. And we had an initial discussion with an advisory committee put together by the Illinois Supreme Court Commission on Professionalism about what they see as the goals of the research and what their views are of bullying. And Lauri, I will say you are not at all alone, because although these were all leaders in the profession on this committee, every one of them, virtually every one of them, had stories about bullying and the terrible impact it had. And so we took a lot of the sort of literature and discussions that we had, and we decided to use a two-pronged approach. We wanted to do a survey for the kind of systematic data about a general population. That is, we surveyed all lawyers in the state of Illinois, and while not every lawyer responded, over 6,000 lawyers responded. And we could tell from the demographics of the respondents that we got a good representative sample of all lawyers in the state of Illinois. And we used the survey to study the breadth of who is bullied and how and when. For example, we could look at, are certain groups of lawyers more likely to be bullied? What type of lawyer in what role does the bullying, and where and what settings? And how do those who are bullied react? And can they count on employers or others in authority, like judges, to do something when bullying takes place? And ultimately, what do people think are good practices to eliminate bullying from the profession? And so that was a very systematic survey. We also did about a dozen focus groups, and they were small group discussions with lawyers, and one of them was with judges also. And those discussions allowed a deeper dive into personal experiences with bullying, how it truly felt, the personal stories and emotional reactions about the impact, who helped or didn't, and how people were surprised about the reactions of others, especially their employers, to bullying, and what should. And we solicited ideas because we wanted a range of ideas about what people thought employers and judges and bar associations and other leaders should do to stop bullying from taking place on the everyday basis that it does take place.
Excellent.
And I wanted to just add that the sample was really representative, so that we had respondents from every different type of practice setting: law firms, corporations, in-house legal departments, government, public interest, not-for-profit organizations, academia, and the judiciary, and also different locales, geographic locales around the state of Illinois, which was important. And the profile of lawyers who took our survey approximate the age and gender distribution of lawyers who practice in Illinois. So we think this is a very good survey in terms of what it measures and how we use that data to also extrapolate about what this means for the profession.
Excellent.
I would just add one other plug, and that is for everyone, I hope to read the survey, but also to read the comments, Lauri, because they really are heartbreaking narratives of what people endured and how fresh, even though our survey, by the way, basically tested experiences during 2022, 2023, so it would be more accurate and reliable. But you could see that there were deep scars from individuals who had been bullied in the legal profession.
Let me just say that Bobby is making a good point, because unlike some of the other studies we did, in the survey itself, we often asked open-ended questions about reactions and experiences. And it was shocking. I mean, there were literally thousands of responses that people would give to one question about their experience. And we asked about judges, and we asked about employers, and we asked about what happens in litigation. And people had you could tell they had very strong views, and it's all laid out in the report, the individual comments. And of course, the focus groups also generated a set of comments. But I think one of the things that Bobby and I were most shocked about or surprised about was how many people gave their own personal stories in the midst of doing the survey.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I don't know anyone in the profession who's been untouched by bullying. I really don't. If they haven't experienced it personally, they've certainly seen it happen, because it's endemic to the culture, especially in litigation. But I've practiced in other areas and still seen it and experienced it. And I think a lot of people brush it off as zealous advocacy. I'm wondering what your response is to that defense.
That's a really good question. And in fact, as part of our recommendations, which I know we'll get to, and as part of one of the top recommendations about training that all legal employers should utilize, one of the recommended best tips is to define what is the acceptable and unacceptable behavior. And zealous advocacy can sometimes cross the line, but it is not what we're talking about. We're talking about persistent misconduct directed at someone with less power, with less rank than the person who is the bully. And it is often repeated behavior. It is not sort of a one and done that someone bullies. And unfortunately, in many organizations, especially in law firms, we got tons of comments about rainmakers or senior partners who were the ones really inflicting this type of misconduct.
Absolutely.
And it wasn't all rainmakers by any means.
No.
But there are situations that were described to us that when a rainmaker does the bullying, it's as though everybody in leadership turns a blind eye, like it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter about the culture. It doesn't matter about how people are developing. It doesn't matter how your lawyers feel or their well-being or their prospects for staying in the firm. And we talk about that in the report and what can, for the well-being of the firm, as well as the people in it, how bullying has really got to be stopped.
And Stephanie makes a really important point, because the bullying is, as I said, this imbalance of power. And it's because there's sort of no accountability in the legal profession for this kind of misconduct that perpetuates and continues this culture where everyone says, oh, this is just a rite of passage. It's a hazing every lawyer has to undergo as part of working in this adversarial profession in which we're all a part of.
Yeah. Yeah, those are all excellent points. And I want to just briefly circle back to another point you made, Bobby, is that you specifically asked people just to respond based on incidents that happened during a 1-year period. And you had an enormous response. And I just want to point that out, that, this is just a snapshot of the kind of conduct that people are enduring over the course of their careers. And if we were to open up the survey for, tell us about things that have happened throughout your career, I mean, you'd have multiple volumes that, I don't know, be like some sort of much thicker than War and Peace, I would imagine the study would be. So can you tell us what are some of the core questions that were addressed in the report?
Sure. And Stephanie alluded to some of them, but basically we wanted to know when and where does bullying take place? Was it in one-on-one meetings? Was it in group meetings? Was it in interactions with clients? In litigation, as you've experienced, Lauri, Was it at social events that were held by the legal employer, or even social events where there were other gathering of lawyers? We also wanted to know, how do lawyers react when they are bullied? What do they do? And to get some data around that. As Stephanie just stated, we wanted to know, what types of support do lawyers who are bullied receive from employers, from judges, and others in position to take action against bullying. And we're going to get into that. To me, those were some of the most shocking findings. And then finally, a hallmark of all the research Stephanie and I do is to have data-based remedies and strategies that employers, judges, bar associations, and even individual lawyers who are bullied can do to mitigate bullying in the profession.
So what are some of the report's key findings?
Well, there are some what I call basic results, and then there are results that pertain to specific demographic groups as well. So we asked people over the past year, have you been bullied? I mean, we did it in a little more refined way, but basically, have you been bullied? And 24% of all lawyers reported that in the past year they were personally bullied at work, with 13% experiencing bullying on multiple occasions. Now, percentages can be a little bit abstract, but let us say in a population of 55,000 lawyers, 24% is 13,000, more than 13,000 lawyers. So you're talking about large numbers of people, large numbers of lawyers who in a given year experience bullying at least once. We detailed the types of bullying that lawyers experience just in the past year. And 66% experienced verbal intimidation, such as insults and name calling and shouting and disrespectful speech. And 59% experienced harsh, belittling, or excessive criticism of their work. That's not, let's sit down and get this brief right. That's, you fill in the blank swear word. How could you create this fill in the blank piece of work? Same thing, very close to demeaning nonverbal behaviors. Finger pointing and eye rolling and staring you down, 59%. And another 56% reported being routinely subject to unrealistic deadlines or other unreasonable work demands. Bobby and I know from a series of our studies, some partner calls you up Saturday night at 8:00. This has to be done by Sunday morning. Or somebody gives you a motion to dismiss to write. It has to be done the next day. A lot of this stuff is just not reasonable. It speaks perhaps to how more powerful people feel that they can make demands no matter what, just to satisfy themselves, not to think about how is it going to affect people in the firm, how will this have a long-term impact. But our report details the types of bullying that take place and how frequently they take place. And then there are also differences by gender. So, for example, of all the people who took the study, 38% of women reported bullying at least once, if not more often, in the past year, compared to 15% of men. So, in the old days when Bobby and I were coming up, there weren't that many women, and women routinely experienced bullying. And I think we thought, well, some of this will change over time. Well, it turns out now over half of all people graduating from law school are women, and the bullying still hasn't stopped. It's still taking place. 38% of women are experiencing it in a given year. So the report has a number of demographic breakdowns, but the one on gender was, especially noticeable.
I would just add, some of the other findings, and really, again, the prevalence, just going back to gender, of those 38%, 40% of women had experienced verbal bullying, such as negative innuendos, insults, tone of voice, and that was specifically related to their gender. So, again, we're going to talk about this. How does that impact these lawyers? And then how does that impact the profession? But it wasn't just women, disabled lawyers, lawyers of color, LGBTQ plus lawyers, and obviously age played a big difference with younger lawyers experiencing more bullying. And also older lawyers over the age of 65. So on both extremes.
So one of the things that we are especially proud about, really, is the way that we took personal comments and embedded it into the statistics. So, for example, in the section on verbal bullying targeting gender, you have comments like this. I have been insulted, yelled at, unfairly criticized, had my personal space invaded, and threatened in offices and courtrooms for nearly 30 years. That's long term. Verbal bullying, shouting, insults, being called demeaning names such as sweetheart, honey, and cutie, to more extreme name calling such as, and I won't say the two words, but one begins with F and one begins with C. And there's just comment after comment about what people had to experience at a very personal, in the trenches level.
So I would just say big picture, it is clear from our data that it's underrepresented groups that are more likely to be the targets of bullying. And we also did, with respect to lawyers of color, a multiple regression analysis that showed that lawyers of color were more likely to experience bullying than white lawyers, and like women lawyers also had 24% were also the target of race-based verbal bullying. So this is again based on their race. That was the bullying that took place. This was also true with LGBTQ plus lawyers and disabled lawyers. And again, this type of bullying behavior has a very pernicious effect on lawyers and how they respond to it, and ultimately whether or not they're going to stay at their legal employer or even in the profession.
Yeah, I mean, so my mind is racing, my heart is pounding because you brought to mind so many examples of things I experienced personally. And Stephanie, I want to pick up on one example that you shared and give you a real life example of it, because the unreasonable deadlines, that's a more subtle form of bullying, but it absolutely happens. And it's not as easy to detect and explain to someone how that impacts you as it would be to say, well, that partner called me an F blank C blank, right? So here's an example that happened almost 20 years ago, and it's still making my heart pound at this moment. I walked in to the office at the law firm where I was practicing at that point here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 8:00 on a Monday morning. And the partner I was working with told me, there's a document production beginning today at noon in Orange County, California. You get on a plane and get out there for that document production today. And I said, no. And he said, what? I said, no, I can't do that. I have other responsibilities. I have other work to do. I can get on a plane out there tomorrow, but I cannot get out there on a plane today.
And I think especially what we found also, and this dovetails with other research that we've done, especially we saw bullying directed at mothers as a result of the fact that they were taking care of children or had to accommodate a sick child or some other responsibility that they had juggling their professional and their personal obligations. And, we got a comment that's one that we've often seen in our motherhood research, which was especially when women come back from maternity leave, these women who were stars before they left, somehow when they came back were legally deficient. And, in prior research, women have said, I had a baby, not a lobotomy.
One of the things we also did is we wanted to know who does the bullying. So we have data again from the survey, because we were asking about incidents in the last year, which we thought would be fresh in mind. So this doesn't go back 20 years about something that happened. This is in a given year, who is the bully? And a third of respondents said that the bully was a lawyer outside of my firm or company. Almost a quarter said the bully was a lawyer in my firm or company who is senior to me. And another 14% said the bully was a judge. And then there's sort of a smaller percentage of bullies in other roles. But a lawyer outside of the firm or company, and then two very powerful figures, one inside the firm and the other a judge. And of course, a lawyer outside the firm or company could be your client, or it could be, as very often happens in litigation, an opposing counsel who wants to push their weight around and tries to do it by bullying. And Bobby and I are both in litigation, and we've seen this happen many times. And sometimes what happens is people revert to bullying when they don't have either the law or the facts on their side. So they kind of want to push people around. And unfortunately, that sometimes happens in front of judges. And what we found is a number of judges were quick to say, I'm not going to let this happen. But that's not 100%. And we really got to get to the point when 100% of judges don't turn away, but turn to it and say, stop, this is not happening in my courtroom.
Absolutely. Now, each of you has more than once used the word surprised or shocked. So I want to ask you to elaborate. Were you surprised by anything the study uncovered?
Yeah, I'm going to list a couple of things that I personally was shocked about. The first was that 24% of lawyers said that they were bullied to do something unethical or improper in the past year. So you think about that, that's a huge percentage. And as Stephanie said, when you look at the data overall, 1 in 4 lawyers had been bullied in the last year. I think I was also really surprised by how ineffectual employers' responses were to such misconduct. So over half, 52% of respondents gave their employers low ratings as to how they reacted when bullying was reported. 31% rated the response as not sufficient, and another 21% rated the response as totally unsatisfactory. And then another result is something that we wanted to test, and something you alluded to, Lauri, and that is bystanders. What were bystanders' reactions? So it's not only that you've been bullied, but tons of people have witnessed bullying. And how did they react when they saw someone being bullied? And shockingly and disturbingly, 79% either walked away, ignored the conduct, or just pretended like they hadn't witnessed anything. So 79% of respondents, didn't react, didn't do anything, didn't intervene. And so this really, I think, exemplified how lonely this is to be bullied, that you're not going to have your employer stepping up to resolve this or to take action. You're not going to have your colleagues or your supervisor or the judge do something when you've been bullied. And then I guess my final shock was that 20% of lawyers, when they were bullied, and given those statistics, I guess it shouldn't have been surprising, but it was, took no action after they were bullied. And only 20%, so 20% were the only ones who reported the conduct to a supervisor, an upper level attorney, or an HR manager. So again, this is not only widespread, but it is lawyers are not stepping up to what Stephanie said, to implementing the types of policies and remedies that have to change to make the structural responses to bullying really, really be effective.
Yeah, so I mean, you've answered my next question, which is why is bullying so underreported? It's because people don't do anything about it when it gets reported, or people who do report get retaliated against.
Yes.
So we have some data on that.
Yeah, please.
We have data because, as Bobby said, we were surprised that only 20% of lawyers who were bullied reported it to their supervisor or to an upper level attorney or to HR. But then we found out what happens when it is reported. And the majority of lawyers who reported it said that who reported to their employer said that their employer expressed concern about what happened. 75% of employers expressed concern. But then when you look to the next step, did they commit to taking appropriate action? Did they commit to promptly investigating? Did they offer me access to support services? That's all under 20%. And some employers even questioned the person reporting it in a manner suggesting that the person reporting was at fault, or told me that I was better off not making a complaint and not telling anyone what happened. And I'm emphasizing that because Bobby and I feel very strongly that a lot can be done by employers and leaders that is not being done. And I know we'll get to that in a few minutes. But of course, aside from employers not doing anything, there was fear about reporting to, fear about the status of the bully, fear they may lose their job. They don't want to be perceived as weak or a complainer. They think they would not be believed. And sometimes, unfortunately, the person who did the bullying is the person who, in their system, they'd have to report the bullying about. So that's not great either. And again, there are a lot of comments that people gave in the survey. One woman who worked in government said, if I say something, I might lose my job. So I'm not going to jeopardize that. And going to HR, another said, is not a good option because you get branded as a troublemaker, especially if you're making allegations against a leader. Another lawyer said, well, I'm in a culture that just says, suck it up and just take it, and otherwise you'll make it worse. So there were lots and lots of comments showing the sort of felt experiences about why reporting was considered not just a bad idea, but sometimes could be dangerous to how their careers actually ended up.
And I think the importance of all of this data is, what are the consequences to legal employers and to the profession? And, attrition, we found from our data that there is a connection between what happens when lawyers are bullied and whether or not they're going to remain in their job. 9% of our respondents said that they were looking for a new job because they had been bullied. And if you extrapolate that, that's 5,000 lawyers over the last year who were looking for a new job because they were bullied. And not only that, again, going back to the point I made about underrepresented group, but women were 3 times more likely than men to leave a job because of bullying, 28% to 10%. This was also true for disabled lawyers. Also, 25% of LGBTQ plus lawyers and 28% of disabled lawyers. And the attrition of these talented lawyers of these underrepresented group deprives legal employers, and it deprives the profession of the enormous talent of these lawyers, and also is sort of ridiculous for legal employers who've spent all of this time that they've invested and money in terms of training and making sure that you have lawyers all along the pipeline to be able to take on leadership roles and become partners or to have leadership roles in their organizations.
That's a really good point because turnover is really expensive. You think about the amount of money that a law firm spends on a first-year associate. In many cases, they pay for their bar preparation. They pay for them to take the bar exam, in addition to giving them a big fat salary that they are not really billing at an efficient enough rate to support in the first year or two. It seems ridiculous to flush all that money down the toilet over entirely preventable behaviors.
Some of the reactions that lawyers had after being bullied were really affecting well-being. So, for example, 54% of bullied lawyers experienced a negative change in emotional well-being, like increased anxiety, lack of self-confidence, and other negative feelings and reactions. And almost 40% felt less productive at work. 20% experienced a decline in physical health. So the impact on these lawyers it's really quite poignant. And one lawyer commented, bullying compounds itself. After being bullied, you begin to worry. Then you have trouble sleeping. You come to work, but you aren't working at your full capacity. And the worst part is, it made me second guess myself. So there are really tangible emotional and psychological reactions that affect mental well-being and also physical well-being.
Absolutely. And let me put some flesh on that skeleton for you. At that same job that I was just telling you about, and which, by the way, was not the only job in which I was bullied and not the only job I left because of bullying. It just has the most colorful stories attached with it. I would come to work every morning and I would work out beforehand in the gym that was in the same building of my law firm. And after I finished my workout, I would get in the shower and just sob for a while because I did not want to go to work. Fast forward, a couple months after that experience of being asked to get on a plane that day for document production that the partner obviously had known was going to begin that day for at least 30 days. I was hospitalized for double pneumonia at 30 years old. And, the nurse, because I was in the hospital for 4 days.
Wow.
On intravenous antibiotics. I'm sorry. But it has a physical impact on people. And I think that gets lost.
Well, one, thank you for sharing that. And that's the type of stories that we received in focus groups. And as I said, these incidents, even though it was 10, 15 years ago, are still so raw in terms of how you were treated and your confidence in yourself, especially someone who's been successful in law school, had a clerkship, had all of these attributes of being a star, and then how you are treated and what that impacts you physically. And of course, what happens in terms of people then leaving the profession. And so, again, we think this study is so important that the legal profession needs to send a very strong message that it cannot be tolerated, that we want employers to be armed with the recommendations we're going to talk about to actually do something. The Illinois Commission on Professionalism has undertaken to really try to implement policies and steps that you really see some action to this, that this is not it's not something that's buried. This is not normalized. This is not what people have to put up with. So, Lauri, we're so grateful to you.
One of the strong messages that also came through from comments in the survey and from the focus groups, that there have to be consequences. So we received comments like, if there are no consequences to bad behavior, it will continue. There need to be consequences or behavior doesn't change. Bullying happens because it's allowed to happen. And I could go through hundreds of comments like that. But everyone who appreciates that bullying takes place and is a bad thing to happen also understands that one individual or one group or one report isn't going to change the world. It really is up to those who are leaders in the profession, leaders at work, bar associations, and those who are in charge, like judges, to take steps that will really make this unacceptable behavior.
We can't ignore this anymore, and accountability is simply lacking, and it has to be addressed.
And toward that end, what are some of the report's key recommendations for addressing bullying?
We have a number of highly focused recommendations because, you could have dozens of them, but we have 5 types of recommendations that we think will really have a strong impact. One is that it's up to the workplace to put policies in place. It's no longer a legitimate excuse to say, well, we don't have an anti-bullying policy, or, well, that's not something that the workplace has to deal with. No, that's wrong. We would certainly hope that all employers implement anti-bullying policies in workplaces where lawyers practice. And the policies need to unequivocally denounce bullying and clearly describe what is improper bullying conduct and unacceptable behaviors. And that's one of the reasons why in our report we laid out a scenario for how you implement a doable, effective policy. You need, if you have workplace policy against bullying, you need a definition of what is bullying and examples of it. You need procedures for confidential and retaliation-free reporting. It should no longer be the case that people are afraid to report. You need procedures for investigation and follow-up. You need a policy for implementing remedial actions. It's not, either or. It's not necessarily that if someone has bullied another person at work, that the bully somehow has to go. There are phases and steps that can take place to have remedial actions. And then there needs to be follow-up. Follow-up with the individuals and follow-up to see how the policy is working. So you just don't write a policy and, somehow turn the wheel and think it's going to work forever and ever. No, it requires assessment and review at regular time periods.
And I would say we follow that with a recommendation about training. So there has to be at least annual training about the policy, the individuals, and we recommend 2 individuals to whom bullying conduct should be reported in case you have to report it to the bully or there's some other problem that there's actually a choice. There has to be training about confidentiality in terms of how do you thread that needle so you can ensure that the complaint is kept confidential. It may not remain confidential because the remedial action actually may result for the bully to be demoted. There has to be pay consequences. We think, there's got to be real accountability and even termination. I mean, again, as we said, there are many comments that, especially with rainmakers, that there was just a blind eye because this individual brought in so much business. So again, having training in terms of how do you communicate when you're taking information about a complaint. How do you follow up with respect to that? So again, what we talked about before, training so that you know what is the difference between zealous advocacy and what crosses the line, and what happens if you have a client, because many times that is also a problem, that clients believe that the best way to achieve a goal is for their lawyer to be uber aggressive to the other side. So how do you treat that? And also, this is not like you come into a law firm and you've never experienced bullying. We think training also has to occur back in law schools, where, by the way, people can also be bullied, given the methods that are often used in law school, and that lawyers are educated about what, like for you, Lauri, if someone is giving you these unrealistic demands, that constitutes bullying. It's not in your head that this is okay. And then what are the steps you need to take to try and address and remedy that? And then we have some recommendations with respect to courts. These results are, yes, they're based on Illinois, but we believe and we hope that other Supreme Courts and bar associations replicate this survey, because this is not something that just occurs for Illinois lawyers. This is something that is occurring everywhere, and we need to have the data to show that.
One thing that the study made clear, and that has been my experience, is there aren't written standards that judges can follow. I mean, there may be an ethics rule or maybe there isn't, but there aren't written standards about situations and guidance. What do you do when you see bullying or incivility in the courtroom? So one of our suggestions is that groups of courts, so for example, in our state, the courts are grouped into circuits. In other states, they may be grouped into other types of jurisdictions. But basically, with any small group, county-based, circuit-based group of courts, that they have written standards for what to do when bullying takes place. And the second thing, again, happily in Illinois, there is training about bullying in the profession. And we think that not only should the training be continued, but it should probably be enhanced and maybe also use some of the data that we found in the profession to do that educational training. And I'm confident that the powers that be in terms of setting rules and professional ethical standards will take account of anything else that is needed to take place here.
And why these standing orders are important is that you want some uniformity about what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And it shouldn't be sort of the luck of the draw that you got a judge who will actually take action when they witness bullying of a lawyer or even witnesses, but that judges will be trained to know about what is acceptable and unacceptable behavior and what the tools they have, again, and the power they have to prevent bullying. And finally, we have a recommendation about what bar associations can do and what they can do in terms of CLEs, their publications, model anti-bullying policies that can be implemented. And most importantly, again, because there is such a lack of support, that they can have mentorship policies, or they can have individuals who can mentor others who've been bullied, who may not want to report it to their law firm right away, but want to have someone they can talk to or bounce an idea as to what they could do.
And
It
we
seems like
also have a set of steps that we recommend to individuals. So, for example, one of my favorites is you should practice what you're going to do if you're bullied. I mean, I'm sure that almost every lawyer has had a bullying experience, and maybe they said, I didn't want to handle it that way. Well, think about the bullying experiences described in our report and the experience that you or your friends have had, and practice. What are you going to say and do? So you actually feel comfortable saying and doing what you think is the right response. You could also, if, for example, if you're in a courtroom with a judge, sometimes, unfortunately, judges bully, and that's a very delicate situation because you're representing a client in front of the judge. So you should think in advance about what do you want to do if that happens. I mean, I know that in the courtrooms in Illinois, when we go into the courtroom, you usually go in at the beginning of the call and you can see a lot of things happen before your case is called. So based on that experience as well, it's something to think about. What am I going to say or do if that happens to me? And I'm a big believer in rehearsing.
yes.
How you want to react and what you can do. And you can do it with a trusted friend. You can do it with a small group. You can do it with a parent. You can do it with any other adult that you think is a good person to as your sounding board to stop bullying, stop you from being assaulted with bullying.
I love that recommendation because I am also a big believer in rehearsal, and lawyers rehearse their oral arguments. They rehearse their examinations, they rehearse depositions, and so this can be another tool in their toolkit that's not completely a foreign concept. So I think that is a very, very wise recommendation. And it also seems that many of the recommendations you make are parallel to recommendations that are often provided for stopping harassment, unlawful harassment within organizations. So, I mean, is that where many of the recommendations are drawn from? And if so, what experience or anecdotal evidence do you have that those kind of recommendations will actually help solve the problem?
We did not actually draw on the harassment literature to any great extent or on anti-harassment policies. We believe that bullying is broader, and we had a lot of data from the survey and from the focus groups about what policies and practices would work. And that's what we drew on. So our best practices are really data-based best practices. And there was the view that bullying is different from and broader and shouldn't be one-on-one linked to sexual harassment. And we agree with that because we saw it very broadly. We saw it happening to men and women of all races and ethnicities and of all ages. And it was something different from sexual harassment.
And I think it also, for individuals, why we wanted to make this clear distinction is that I think people say, oh, I wouldn't sexually harass somebody. I wouldn't harass somebody based on their race or ethnicity. I might bully them, but I might not do that. And so, again, because bullying is this broader conduct, and it's also, I think what we found, and I think it's something that lawyers actually do believe, but again, the data supports us, that bullying is sort of ingrained in the legal profession because of this power imbalance that's inherent, the business pressures that lawyers have to deal with every day, and just the training that you get and what senior lawyers or judges, the power that they can exert over younger lawyers, lawyers who are, as I say, came from an underrepresented group. So, it's really important, I think, that we have these recommendations. We hope that law firms, we hope legal organizations, we hope everyone will read this report. It's really critical. Again, as I said at the beginning, I think this data really is a wake-up call to the profession that this conduct can't be tolerated anymore. And as lawyers, we have a professional responsibility to make sure that our profession treats everyone with respect, with dignity, and civility.
Absolutely.
Well said.
Well said. Very well said. So you've done a wonderful job answering all of the questions that I could come up with. I'm wondering, is there anything else you would like our audience to know?
We're extremely grateful to Erica Harold, the executive director of the Illinois Supreme Court Commission on Professionalism, our advisory committee, and of course the justices of the Illinois Supreme Court, because this was, they really had the vision, they had the commitment and the passion to undertake and really shine a spotlight on this conduct.
And we are also very grateful to the people who took the time and thought and overcame maybe some reluctance, took the time and thought and overcame their reluctance against participating in research like this.
And to you, Laura, for again helping us showcase this research, and again sharing your own personal experiences, which again I think demonstrates to Stephanie and me this was a labor of love to do this research, and we're happy that it's out.
It will make a difference. It definitely will. And so I want to thank the two of you for the time and passion and effort you've invested in the project and the empirical way in which you organized it and laid it out so that you have hard data that is impossible to ignore in a way that people's personal stories are easy to ignore or discount. So I want to thank the two of you again. I do also want to express thanks to the Illinois Supreme Court and to Erica Harold for having the courage to commission and publish this report. And I will be including a link to the report in the show notes for this episode, as well as a link to the Red B Group's website, so you can learn more about the important work that Bobby and Stephanie have done, not only on this issue, but on many other issues facing the legal profession. So again, my deepest thanks to you, Bobby and Stephanie, for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thank you. This was really just fantastic.
Thank you.